So hi everybody, I'm Mr. Vanover. This is APUSH review for midterm exams, Q1 midterm review. And what I've got is I've got an audience in the room, but they don't want to be on camera. And frankly, some of them would break the camera. So I don't want to scare everybody, even though it is Halloween, it is the season for that. So what we're going to do is we're going to just do some review using some Albert questions so that you can see some stimulus-based multiple choice and kind of just get some strategies to kind of remind you of some things that have gone on throughout the semester or the quarter for that matter, and making sure that you have some sort of ability to kind of get some extra review time in. So without any further ado, let us go to our Albert questions. So I've made these things up. And if you're in first period, this is especially for you. So let's take a look here at the first question, guys. You guys ready? Yeah. Okay, so I hope you can hear everybody there at home. They sound really enthusiastic to be here. So they're what they're doing right now is that they are going to take this first question if it will pop up like it's supposed to. Let's see here. Okay, so I'm gonna dim the lights for those of you in the room, and we'll get the door so you can see all right. You guys are able to spot. But just remember now, when you guys, is there a curve? Is there a curve on the study session? So. Do you get extra credit points? These kids want extra credit for everything, audience. So maybe you can get some candy, but I don't have enough Diet Coke to give you all. So, okay, guys. So here is a image for you. It says the village at Secoutan in Roanoke, painted by Governor John White, circa 1585. Okay, so what do you notice about your image? Let's just do this real quick. It's what? It's what? There's Indians. It appears to be Indians, okay? And you see the Indians in the circle here, and you see that they're sitting there. And what does this look like here? Crops, okay. So, and then we have little huts, right? Okay, so let's take a look at the question. The question, I know this is kind of small, but this is the best I can get at the moment. So the question here is, which of the following regions of North America developed most similarly to the Aztecs? Was it the Great Plains, the Mississippi Valley, the Pacific Coast, or the Great Lakes? You say B? Why do you say B? The Cahokia. The Cahokia people. Is there disagreement in the room? No one is voicing their disagreement. They might be shy because their voices might be. Because we don't know. Okay, so, okay. Or maybe because you don't know. So I'm going to submit your answer then. And B is correct. And what it says here, and so you guys are taking some notes if you need to, is that widespread maize cultivation, along with other crops, allowed the Mississippi Valley Native Americans to settle and develop large villages and cities and a complex trading network. These were similar to advances the Aztecs developed in today's Mexico. It is important to know that the Aztecs' maize cultivation and urban development were similar to some Native American civilizations in the present-day United States. Now, it's also important to kind of see why some of the other choices are not necessarily as good. So if you look at what they show you here, choice B or A, excuse me, is incorrect. Native Americans on the Great Plains were in smaller, isolated hunting and gathering tribes and were not similar to the Aztecs. So think of with Plains Indians, what kind of imagery could you come to mind real quick as far as if you remember things we talked about back at the beginning of the school year? Buffalo. Well, there you go. That's just exactly it. They are They are hunters of buffalo, and they have to follow where the herds go. So that's a perfect thing to kind of keep in mind when you're thinking of the Plains Indians. Looking at the Pacific Coast Native Americans, choice C, they were hunter-gatherers in some areas and seafaring fishermen in others. They were less centralized and did not form larger cities or trade networks. So we know that they're very much isolated in the Pacific Northwest, or the Pacific Coast Native Americans. And then the Great Lakes area featured a huge number of tribes that used waterways to hunt, fish, and trade. While they made some military alliances and were involved in trade, they did not feature agricultural production in large cities or villages. The Great Lakes tribes maintained a more nomadic lifestyle. So there's a little rundown of Native Americans.
Wait, how much of the test is going to be on this list? I thought that this was like less than 5% of the AP test.
So it is less than 5% of the AP test. And on our test, we're looking at roughly somewhere around maybe 8 questions out of 55. So I don't know. I'm not doing all the percentages on it. I'm just trying to keep it as far as the general content went. So let's take a look at one about Native American trade. We still have the same stimulus here. And it says, which of the following is a major effect of trade networks in North America? A, trade networks created unity and peace among neighboring tribes. Trade networks often fell apart due to intertribal warfare. Trade networks led to a pattern of regional capitals. Or trade networks led to an exchange of goods from different regions. So I'm hearing D. Did I hear another one? I heard D. All right, you want me to submit that? Okay, the group says D. And they are correct for doing so because it is the correct answer. So regional trade networks happened in cases where resources were produced in one region but not in a neighboring region. Trade would develop for these items that were not available in certain regions. A is incorrect because while some regions featured trade networks and some tribes were able to peacefully coexist, all regions did include violence and division in some instances. Many tribes fought over territories and natural resources. So while natives tended to be a little more peaceful than warrior Europeans, like say the conquistadores, they were not immune from fighting. B is the incorrect answer. While some areas had less warfare and more trade existed, I'm sorry, I just read that one, did I not? C, while Cahokia did become a regional trade capital in the Mississippi Valley with over 20,000 residents, this was not a common pattern, but rather the exception across North America. Do you remember what else is unique about the Cahokia people that is common amongst Mississippi Valley groups? What's that? They did tend to settle in one place. Has anyone been to Cahokia? The mounds. Yeah, there many of these groups are mound builders, where they build large mounds that sometimes didn't seem to be noticeable until you could see them from air. And there's some in the Ohio River Valley that have some mound building as well, but still in the general region where you find the Mississippi people. So, okay, nicely done.
Mr. David,
Yes, ma'am.
is this question technically just common sense?
Is this question just technically common sense? So, well, I guess that means that depends upon what's considered common sense for you.
Because like if they exchange from different regions, aren't they just gonna have different goods and exchange of goods?
Yeah.
True. What this is so that's a really good question. If they have exchange from different regions, you said, then it's going to be that there's going to be an exchange of goods from different regions. And I think that what this question wants you to remember is, as far as it's not exactly like something that you might encounter on an exam, but it's something to get you to think in terms of review, that you can't get too specific with Native groups as far as saying that the attributes of one tribe are the attributes of all tribes. And you can run the risk of going too broad. It's a really, really odd area to study because there are so many groups. And so we try to find some commonalities, but there are some places that don't have a lot of trade, as we talked about with the last question. If you go to the Pacific Coast Indians, some of those didn't trade with anybody. Some just relied on fishing and maybe some light agriculture, but they didn't necessarily establish large cities or extensive trade networks, but others do. So it's just a matter of trying to get you to review what some of these features are without getting too out of the correct territory when it comes to studying natives in North America. So, all right, the next one's supposed to be a little difficult regarding specifically the Iroquois. So we have same stimulus. This is which of the following characteristics made the Iroquois unique among Native American tribes, North American tribes, excuse me. A, they built the largest city in North America before European arrival. B, they successfully revolted against Spanish rule in the Southwest. C, they formed a confederacy out of 5 tribes and dominated a region thereafter. Or D, they abandoned their hunting and gathering nomadic lifestyles to become settled farmers and focused on maize cultivation. C. That one's supposed to be a difficult one, and that's not a difficult one. That's probably one of the easier ones because we all know about the 5 tribes of the Iroquois. So the Iroquois were 5 Native American tribes that banded together into a permanent political confederacy. Now, do you remember what makes a confederacy a confederacy? Say like under the Articles of Confederation or the Confederate States of America?
Independent.
The states are independent?
Yeah.
What do you mean? Tell me a little more.
It's kind of like the European Union. Like they're not like they're independent, but they like choose to do things together.
Okay, so you brought up the European Union as a more modern day example of one in which the countries are, each of the members of the European Union are technically independent, but they do come together for certain matters of common concern. Okay, so yes, that's right. That's what makes them a confederation. So the very basic definition of a confederation is a loose alliance of associated states. And so this occurred before European colonization, and this allowed them to be a dominant force controlling territories in the northeastern United States of today. This unifying of these tribes were linguistically similar was unique. Having the unity of a confederacy made them bigger than their neighboring tribes and militarily dominant. The Iroquois were further significant in forming their own constitution later on, being involved in the Albany Congress, an anti-French coalition with the colonies and the British government before the 7 Years' War. So remember the Albany Congress or the Albany Plan of Union? Does anybody remember that?
I just remember Join or Die.
Join or Die. Okay, so that is from the Albany Plan of Union. And most people get it confused and think it has to do with the ratification of the Constitution, or that it has something to do with having to join together for the revolution. Neither of those is true. So do you now, can you remember what the Albany Congress did or what they called for? Or does anybody have any notes readily available?
Wasn't like their main purpose to just get the Iroquois on their side?
So Gavin has said it wasn't their main purpose to get the Iroquois on their side. Not totally exactly. But the Iroquois were on the side of British colonists in general when it came to fighting the French. So the Albany Congress, which gave the Albany Plan of Union, I'll give you one more hint, Benjamin Franklin. So one of my students out there, all of you out there in YouTube land, one of my students just said, all I remember about it is Benjamin Franklin. So Martin.
Does that have something to do with the French and Indian War?
It does have to do with the French and Indian or the 7 Years' War, correct?
So the colonists, like, did Benjamin Franklin draw a snake and then he divided up and he said, colonists should join or die.
The colonists should join what? like
forces.
Price Club or?
Yeah, against forces against the French and Indians, or they'll die.
So the colonists should unite as one group.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's an interesting thing to keep in mind. The Iroquois participated in that conference. Benjamin Franklin looked at a group like the Iroquois as their inspiration for this. And he recognized that the 13 colonies were not one unit operating distinctly as one big unit, but as rather 13 separate individual, almost like little countries, which we know that they continue that practice when they come into existence as the United States. So it's an early precursor to foreshadowing, if you want, to some issues that Benjamin Franklin seems to see exist back at the time of the 7 Years' War, long before anybody had thought about independence. So we know that A is incorrect because they did not build, the Iroquois did not build the largest pre-Columbian city, Cahokia. That was built down in the Mississippi River Valley near what is present-day St. Louis. B is incorrect because the Iroquois were located in the northeast of today's United States. What was the group that successfully revolted against Spanish rule in the Southwest? The Pueblo Revolt, correct. Or has another name? Pope's Rebellion. Nice on that one, Sammy. I heard you kind of get that one out there. So the Pueblo Indians in today's Southwest United States revolted against Spanish rule and were able to keep the Spanish neutralized for several years. And choice D is incorrect, as maize was less of a factor in the Northeast. Maize cultivation was hardly unique to the Iroquois, as Mississippi Valley and Southwest Native Americans had societies that developed around maize cultivation or corn. All right, let's look at one that has to do with, let's say, French interaction with natives. So let's pull this up here. Here we have Luc Flair. That's my French for y'all. Circa 1670, France bringing faith to the Indians of New France. This is found in Eric Foner's Give Me Liberty textbook. So, which of the following intellectuals and their ideas would have had a point of view most consistent with that of the painting? Now, this is an interesting one. So, think about this really fast before we even preview the questions. What do you know about the French and the natives and the subjects of this painting? What can you think about right now before you even know what it's asking you? So Maggie says they had a good relationship. Okay.
Native Americans were kind of assimilated into their society. They would civilize them.
So Native Americans tended to be a little more assimilated in the society, you said?
Yeah, they're kind of like they were really intertwined. Some of them would join French colonies, but a lot of them would trap fur for them and trade with them.
Okay, so we know that so I want to caution you a little bit, because the French aren't known for completely assimilating as much as they were cooperating, and you got the cooperation part. So you did get the idea that they often worked with the French and helping them with trapping furs, and they developed a cooperative trading relationship with them. So assimilation would literally mean trying to take the Indian groups, the native groups, and make them French. So they'd have to speak French, they'd have to dress like the French, they'd have to observe Christianity. It doesn't mean that the French don't try to bring Christianity to them, but there's a difference between the French method of missionary work and the Spanish method of missionary work. Amy, you have your hand up.
So would the Spanish try to assimilate the Indians?
So Amy asked, did the Spanish try to assimilate the Indians? What do you think is the answer to that question?
I mean, yeah, because they like tried to convert them to Christianity, but how you were just saying they like made them dress like how the Spanish did they do that?
So what do we know about the Spanish and their interaction with the natives in terms of what we would call assimilation?
Isn't it more of like that encomienda?
So you brought up the encomienda system. So
like it wouldn't really be assimilating, it's more like force.
So Christina brought up the encomienda system, which had more of a forceful nature to it. So assimilation, that's a real hard one. If you look at the Spanish, I wouldn't say that the Spanish totally were about assimilation as much as they were. There's assimilation by just being present. So for example, when you're a freshman in high school, you come in not really having any kind of idea what the culture is totally like, or what the routines like, or what the people are like, or what the teachers are like. But very soon you'll become assimilated as part of the student body. You'll acclimatize or acculturate. You'll understand what's going on in your immediate surroundings, and you'll become part of the larger group. Now, that's not a forced situation. The Spanish forced things to happen with the natives. The French don't really try to make them try to be like them. There may be some cultural exchange just because they're around each other, but there's a difference between the Spanish basically forcing it with a sword or a gun and the French, who didn't really have that kind of relationship. And the reason why I say that there's forced and then there's like assimilation by circumstance, because we're going to learn later that Native Americans will be put onto the reservation system as you know it today, and they'll be forced to go to boarding schools where the goal was assimilation. And it was well-meaning in the idea that they thought these were people who really thought they were helping natives, but literally was going to force all of their native culture out of them and bring them into the ways of whites with Christianity and speaking English and white manner of dress and living. It was basically trying to stamp out all of their native culture. The idea thinking that that would make them successful at integrating with the rest of the population, but at a loss that we know is at a loss of much of their cultural value. So that's still forced assimilation. That isn't the same thing as the Spanish did. But if you look here and you're thinking about what you know, well, this one's a bad question actually, because it brings up things that will happen later. So this is a fair question for you actually when you get to an AP exam, because you'll have studied the later things. But if you think about this, if you think about the ideas of, if you think about social Darwinism, which many of you have an understanding of from world history, would you say that the French missionary or the trapper relationship that we know about would fall within line of your ideas of social Darwinism? You're saying no. Why? Martin or Andrea, one of the two of you.
So social Darwinism was where the whites tried to prove that the African Americans were a lesser culture based off of stuff like the shape of their head and the way that evolution should have come from a monkey. But it's very different from the French, who try to assimilate even their culture with, they try to combine the Indian culture with their own culture and intermarry. So they're kind of creating not really a caste system like social Darwinism would create, but much more of an integrated society. So it's almost the opposite.
So it's almost the opposite of the ideas of social Darwinism, which Martin pointed out is a idea that those people who are Anglo-Saxon or whites are better than those of African descent. And it was used to justify much of the activities. If you look at the 1890s there on that one, it's something that comes about much later than the periods we're studying, which is it comes around as a justification for countries of the world to go in and take over lesser peoples as they saw them. So, and you don't know much about the social gospel, but the social gospel movement is one in which you have this idea that people of wealth had an obligation to help those who were less off or not as better off as they are. And so when you look at that, A is actually the correct one when you look at manifest destiny, because if you look at it, it's the premise that it's, remember, the manifest destiny is the idea that it's the premise that everybody, the Americans are supposed to overspread their continent because God smiled on them. And that's the idea that you're kind of seeing here. If you look at the French idea, at least in this particular case, they're trying to show the glory of God. And this is you see a native person here who's now wearing some French robes. See the fleur de lis? there, the little flowery looking thing, and is appearing to be in awe of the person who is wearing a crown. So it almost looks like it's supposed to be a representation of the French crown, bringing faith to the Indians, and so that's great and everything. But we know they didn't force it. And the reason why this is a tricky question is because manifest destiny, some would say, has the idea of force behind it. Can you tell me an example of where manifest destiny has an idea of force behind it? Go ahead, Martin.
As the colonists moved, not only the colonists, the Americans moved westward, they took every opportunity to take the Indians off the land and clear the forest.
Okay, so we know that they, as Americans, either as colonists or later on as American citizens, moved westward. They took every opportunity they had to kick natives off their lands. And Amy, you got another one?
Would that also be like the Indian Removal Act?
So you have the Indian Removal Act. That's a good one as well. So the Indian Removal Act and the removal of the Cherokee from their lands would be another example of manifest destiny by force, or manifesting itself as force. Go ahead, give me another one, Grace.
Well, manifest destiny was kind of founded on the idea of that American culture was better than all others and of white superiority.
Okay, so it's founded on the idea that American values are better than all others, and even to an extent, white superiority is part of that as well. So you have that too. There's one big one. There's one big one that you guys are leaving off. That is an example of manifest destiny kind of showing up as a forceful action, playing out as a forceful action. The ultimate in forceful actions. The Mexican-American War. Keep in mind, there was a huge national debate about the Mexican-American War, and that's where John L. O'Sullivan coined the phrase manifest destiny, arguing that the United States should go to war. The United States should take that. The United States should annex Texas. It should take all of that because it's their manifest destiny. God has shown them that this is what they're supposed to do. This is the future that they're supposed to have. Martin.
Was manifest destiny coined before Polk or after Polk?
During. Yes. So manifest destiny is definitely a response to the fervor of the time regarding controversies surrounding whether or not there should be any attempt to take what eventually we call the Mexican Cession as part of the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo. All right, nicely done, guys. Let's see, let's go to another period. I'm going to look at the First Great Awakening. Ooh. Okay, now, here's what I'm going to try to give you an idea about. When you get a stimulus-based question, before you start reading every word of the stimulus, first off, take a look at who the author is, the year, and then take a look at what you're asked to do in the question. You might find that you don't have to read the stimulus really closely for all of the questions. And you might be able to buy yourself more time for ones in which you have to read closer. Lots of people will start off reading the stimulus before they look at what's being asked of them. And you saw today on a test that you took for your unit test today that there are some questions that could exist on their own without the stimulus, right? And that happened probably, if you guys noticed, on your AP exam for world history, if you took it. There are some that don't. The stimulus is kind of helpful to have there, but it's not necessarily something you have to note word for word. So look at your stimulus. Always look at your source information as far as year and person, because in most cases, you're going to be able to look at the year and be able to think of something happening at that time, or you're going to look at the person and it's going to be somebody you know, you've heard of, we've studied. So that way, if you look at it, sometimes you can immediately in your mind probably have a very good and accurate idea what this passage is going to be about. So what do you know? This isn't the same thing that we looked at. What do you know that we did with Jonathan Edwards in class? What did we look at, read, and actually concurrently listen to?
They're at the hands of an angry God.
Sinners in the hands of an angry God. Remember that one? God is loathsome or is loathing you. You are loathsome, excuse me. And God is holding you over a pit of fire and hell. And it's like by a thread that's no thicker than a spider's web. Silk of a spider. So First Great Awakening, which began in the 1730s. Let's look at this question. A, was designed to appeal to the unchurched in American English colonies in America. B, did not affect the lives of African Americans. C, incited religious division between old traditionalists and new revivalists. Or D, was relegated to the colonial frontier backcountry.
C.
You say C. Why?
Process of elimination.
Process of elimination. So tell me what caused you to eliminate the other ones.
Okay. A, it was not just to, it was designed to try to encompass everyone.
Okay,
So
so
the church and the non-church.
so it was designed to, so you said A, you can eliminate because it was designed opposite of this to appeal to the churched and the unchurched.
It's called a revival. It doesn't mean like it's a revival of religion. That means like some people already have religion.
So because it's called revival, you can reason that some people are supposed to be the recipients of this message that already had religion.
Yeah.
Okay?
And B, African Americans were affected by the Great Awakening, especially with the development of the religion.
Okay, so African Americans were definitely affected by the Great Awakening, and you pointed out that they start to develop their own unique religious traditions.
And we'll see possibly like the Methodist Church and stuff like that.
We'll see the Methodist.
Like this, like originate from Great Awakening.
Okay, we'll see new religions come out of the Great Awakening. Okay, and why not D?
It doesn't make sense.
It doesn't make sense.
Yeah, it doesn't even, it's not really cool.
Okay. Anybody else have anything to say about this one and why it should be C?
I just knew that like the Great Awakening was kind of controversial because it was so intense, and so I know that it like kind of drove like how it says it made a religious division. So it says that like specifically in the reading.
Okay, so you can remember it saying that, especially with its intensity from the reading. Okay, Maggie?
Well, I just thought because they wanted to get rid of the idea of predestination, right?
So it goes against the idea, the Great Awakening preachers had messages that were kind of against the idea of predestination.
Yeah, so they wanted to create another new idea.
So they want to create another new idea that would satisfy both sides of that debate. So keep in mind, where are we more likely to find predestination as a thing? Calvinist religions, and what's probably the most well-known Calvinist religion? Nope. Puritans. You're right.
One thing I know.
That's good. I'm sure you know more than one thing, Maggie. I promise you have to. So if we take a look here, you guys did an awesome little review there. So C is the correct answer. The First Great Awakening sought to pull believers away from the ritual, ceremony, and hierarchy from the traditional churches, leading them to churches which espoused or preached a personal commitment to redemption and salvation. As a result, traditionalists like the Congregationalists and Presbyterians saw their numbers fall. New revivalist denominations like the Methodists, as Martin pointed out, and the Baptists experienced a dramatic increase in membership. And so look at some of their explanations and think about what Martin said. A is incorrect because the First Great Awakening looked to rekindle religious fervor in the hearts of established churchgoers who were perhaps caught up in the economic prosperity of the English colonies. The Second Great Awakening, which takes place at the beginning of the 19th century, appealed more to the unchurched. Millennialists had hoped to increase the flock of believers prior to the anticipated second coming of Christ. And choice B says, although the revivalist preachers did not challenge the existence of slavery, some were slaveholders themselves, and many Methodist and Baptist ministers welcomed converts from the black population, both free and slave. And then later on, it became the belief emerged that it was their Christian duty to teach slaves about the Bible. And because the slaves couldn't read and weren't permitted to read in most cases, they would have to be taught by their ministers. And D is incorrect because the First Great Awakening is a religious experience that swept all over the English colonies, not just the back country. And it was particularly intense in New England, which we know to be very much a coastal place. So you guys had some great reasoning there. Nice. Yes.
So traditionalist versus new revivalist, is that the same as like old lights versus new lights?
That's exactly what that means.
The first awakening. Right?
Yes. And that's really good that you remember that the new lights versus the old lights is a First Great Awakening thing. And that's a term that your book author uses. And you'll see it in other books too. So this is a perfect example of where there's also different people, different sources will name the same concept by different names. So traditionalists versus revivalists, old lights versus new lights. And we often, we know that there's a definite turn against the Puritans at this time as well. And so let's see, let's find you another one to look at. We've got the First Great Awakening. Let's look at British taxation. So here we go. We have a letter. It says letters from a farmer in Pennsylvania, the author of whom is John Dickinson, written in 1767. Let's look at the question first. New complaints of colonists directed towards the Townshend Acts were most likely the result of which of the following? The Townshend Acts imposed a direct tax. The colonists felt they should not be responsible for paying off the British war debt. The revenue from the Townshend Acts was being used to pay British royal governors, taking that authority and power away from colonial assemblies, or the colonists were already being restricted from the production of many goods and now were being further discriminated against. Do you think we got to look at the stimulus? Okay, let's look at the stimulus. Excuse me. If at length it becomes undoubted that the inveterate resolution is formed to annihilate the liberties of the governed, the English history affords frequent examples of resistance by force. What particular circumstances will in any future case justify such resistance can never be ascertained until they happen. Perhaps it may be allowable to say generally that it never can be justifiable until the people are fully convinced that any further submission will be destructive to their happiness. Okay, not getting a lot of hint from the stimulus, right? Okay, so we know that they're having trouble with taxes. Duh, we all know that, right? I hope we do. So let's take a look at this. The Townshend Acts imposed a direct tax. They shouldn't be responsible for paying off British war debt. Revenue was being used to pay British royal governors, taking the authority away from colonial assemblies. Or colonists were already being restricted from the production of many goods and now were being further discriminated against. You say C. Lucy held up C. So let the record reflect it was Lucy who didn't want to speak out loud. She said C. So let's see. Let's see the explanation. C is correct. Hooray, Lucy. Let's all give Lucy a little clap. Yay. Okay, so Lucy said C. Colonists were angered about having a new tax placed upon them, but they additionally found that the tax revenue was being used to pay the salary of the royal governors, alarming colonial assemblies. They found that they were being used to pay this, alarming. Colonial assemblies had used the fact that they traditionally paid governors and could withhold the salary if they disapproved of the actions of the governors as a check upon unpopular or excessive actions. Now the colonies lost this leverage and the governors could act more in the interest of the king. Colonists felt that this was another violation of their rights as Englishmen. So one of the things to think about here is that The colonists, governors are always supposed to be, everybody's supposed to answer to the king, to the British monarch. But they found that if by paying their salaries of the governors, by collecting their own colonial taxes, that they had something to hold over the governor's head. So we already know that what was a very common illegal activity that occurred? Smuggling. So there's a perfect example of where the governors of the colonies probably were well aware that smuggling was happening. They weren't observing the Navigation Acts of 1660, but they were allowing it to happen because they knew if they tried to stop it, that their livelihood would be at stake, their income would be at stake. So, Lucy.
Wait, can we go over the difference between a direct tax and an indirect tax?
Okay, so the difference between a direct versus an indirect tax. Does anybody know in the room?
It's like where it's paid, like who pays it. It's something like if it's paid at the docks or something, or if it's paid by the people in England, and it almost makes the same price, but it's just the principle of it.
Okay.
Why it would be not like direct tax. I'm pretty sure the Townsend Acts were indirect though.
So,
100% sure.
so when you say it wasn't necessarily built into the price of the docks, is that what you said?
I don't remember specifically, but I know that the difference was that where the tax was paid. Like sometimes it would be paid by the people like shipping it at the like docks in America, or it would be paid like in England, but it would end up all being in the end price.
Okay, Martin, you had your hand up.
Yeah, I just wanted to add on to that, like, indirect, it usually is an invisible tax, that's why it did make a lot of the general population angry. Indirect tax was not necessarily visible. It was like what she said, tariff, or any of those importation, kind of like before it gets to the consumer. But a direct tax was something that was visibly changed. The price was visibly changed. Like the tax was directed towards that a specific item and was visible to the general masses that this item was being taxed and its price is changing to benefit the royal government.
So was the stamp tax a direct or an indirect?
It was a direct tax, and that's why it made it so infuriating.
Because they had to obtain the stamp to show they had paid the tax.
Yeah.
Okay, Amy.
Didn't the town tax on like lead, paint, and glass? So wouldn't that be like a direct tax? Because it just like the Stamp Act, they had to like not like obtain a stamp, but like pay for the actual thing. Like,
So you said correctly that the Townshend Acts were like on lead, paint, and glass, paper, and goods, things like that. And so when you look at that, as far as the difference between a direct or an indirect tax, an indirect tax would be where, for example, let's say that the price of the good, as Martin and kind of Grace said, like let's say that the tax was paid in England by the manufacturer, but they were for manufacturing, let's say they were manufacturing goods that were specifically to be sold in the colonies. So they're not being sold anywhere else but American colonies. So then the manufacturer will understandably raise the price of their good because they now have to pay a tax to send it out. So that means the price of the good has gone up for the Americans to obtain because of this tax on a good that specifically only goes to American colonies. Are you following me on that one? So the tax is built into the price of the item, which if you didn't know better, you would think the price had gone up just because. But in reality, everyone knew the price went up because the tax was charged at another end and was being passed on through higher prices to the Americans. Does that make sense? I mean, that's just like, that's an example I just kind of came up with at the top of my head. But another example could be when I was a kid, there was a store in my hometown that would sell candy. And that store didn't appear to charge taxes. And I finally figured it out later is because they built the price of the tax into what they put on the price tag. So when you picked it up, and let's say with tax it was $1.06, well, the price tag said $1.06. So the receipt you got didn't show a special sales tax added on to it. It was already built there. So a kid of my age, which was like, say, 8, I didn't know any better. I just thought that was the price of the candy bar, when in reality, the price of the candy bar was actually lower. They just built the tax into the price that they sold it at and put it on the shelf with that price tag there. Where lots of places, most people don't do that. And it's usually because today you want to have your cash register keep track of how much tax you're collecting, because then that tells you how much tax to pay the government. But yeah, so that's kind of that was an indirect tax to me as the kid buying the candy bar. So good questions. I'm really glad you asked that. All right. I'm trying to give you at least one question from each of the time periods to try to just give you some practice here.
Yesterday, I have a question.
Sure.
You said the test. How should we study for the test tomorrow for the final?
Well, that's a great question. So the question that was just asked of me is, how should somebody study for the test tomorrow or for the midterm? And so if you look at my website, so if you go to markvanover.weebly.com, you go to AP US History, and you go to helpful study links, you'll notice there the midterm study hints page. Now, I'm going to tell you my philosophy, and I'm sorry, I didn't change that to 2017, but that's just changing the year. I didn't change this, and this is my philosophy, huge believer in this philosophy. And that is that at this point, you theoretically learn what you need to know for a midterm. And so what I generally recommend for midterm exams is an active review of information, but not much more than that. So let's say if you have a test prep book. So let's say if you have a book like the Princeton Review or what's called the AMSCO book, which is the one with the American flag on the front. And I think that's the one I have linked on my syllabus. This one that has the big United States history flag and then it says on there. Those books you would, in this case, just read through the summaries that they provide you so that you remind yourself of the things you've learned and you have it kind of swimming around in your head. If you don't want to read books or don't have them, which don't fret, I would not pick up your textbook and reread any of that right now. It's too much to read. If you wanted to try to read the wiki notes that are linked from my website, you could do that too, but that's 22 sets of those to read in the next day or two, depending on which period you're in. So one of the things that I recommend is looking at reviews that are made specifically for these purposes. So this one is Mr. Jokes with the, I call him the dorky history teacher. He's got a good review here. It's about 12 minutes. That's like everything from first semester or in traditional schools, first semester. We're at where my school would be like LCC and Torrey will be where we're at in January. And that's where we are right now. So, and if you look here, this is Mr. Norris, Adam Norris, the guy with the red hat and the mustache and logo on his videos. And I've assigned some of those to you to watch. They've got nice overviews. His videos is about 40 minutes, Mr. Norris is. But I also have broken down each of the key concepts by time period so that you can take a look here and look at each one has like 3. And if you wanted to watch these videos, these are about maybe 10 minutes each. I mean, I know that's a lot. I will tell you this much, that key concept 5 is the Civil War, lead up to the Civil War. And there's only a couple of general questions on there, keeping in mind that our classes all just took the Civil War exam. So we weren't going to just completely throw another bunch of Civil War questions at you. If the questions that exist are generally about slavery and the slavery issue and with expansion. And so it's more of an expansion than it is a Civil War topic. But We don't necessarily have tons of information about every compromise on there, or reconstruction, I don't believe is even on there because you just took a test on that stuff. So if you wanted to focus your attentions on periods 1, 2, 3, and 4, that'll save you a little more time. But, and I don't mean just mindlessly watch this. I mean, when I say actively review, if I was to watch a video, I would write down little notes that occur to me new. I wouldn't try to write down everything because you don't want to write down everything. You don't know, excuse me, I'm stating this wrong. You don't need to know absolutely everything that is said or that you review in a reading. What you want to do is think of the things that you either knew that you had trouble with on a quiz, or that maybe it was really something that didn't stand out to you in one of the tests you took. Or something like, okay, I've never heard this before. I'm going to pause it for a second, write it down. Because if you try to write everything down, you can, and some of you will do that and you'll be fine and you'll totally do 100% well tomorrow. Others of you, that would be really overwhelming and not always necessary. So it just kind of depends on what you know your capabilities are and what your preferences are as a student. What I would not do is I would not stay up all night studying for this exam. It's completely counterproductive. It will do nothing but raise your anxiety to a level that will work against you, really, in my opinion. You got to kind of come into this with the mindset is I'm going to do as well as I can do. If you come into it with this is game changing and I have to have this score to get this grade, or I'm not going to pass or get whatever grade I want, then you put a whole new level of pressure on yourself, which tends to, in many cases, backfire, in my opinion. So I think that if you take a general route, you're going to be more better off than if you try to, more better off. I went to college, guys, but you'll be better off and more prepared than if you try to do overkill to get ready for it. If you do have any prep books, they have sample questions in them. That's a good way to just kind of apply your knowledge. You could review by going to History Heart Lady and doing History Heart Lady quizzes. So if you go to Helpful Study Links and you just click on the overall page, that's the US quiz main page. You can go to Albert. I think just the A is linked for some reason. But if you go to Albert, where we just were, you could do a review of the free questions that are available there, and there are free questions. I think there's a limit. I've been told by a couple people who've gone over there and done that, but there are some that you don't have to pay for. The APUSH review videos, you could look at the outlines, although I would not necessarily do that personally. Here's a couple other things that I put together a long time ago. These Gilder-Lehrman Institutes also are pretty good ones. They're about 10 minutes long, and I don't know if anybody's looked at those, but if you look at it, I don't know why it went right down to the bottom, but they have these little videos. This is an 8-minute video in period 1. And this teacher comes in, got some music.
Our first period will cover 3 main themes. Contact.
So you got David Riesenfeld, and everybody thinks he's cool because he's got tatted arms. And, you know, people like me don't. So that might be something that's helpful for you as well. So there's lots of different options available to you to just review. But if you try to memorize everything you can from the textbook in 1 to 2 nights, you're just going to overwhelm yourself. So what other general questions do you have?
Can you give us a targeted terms list?
A targeted terms list?
Like you did last class.
I don't have one ready. I'd have to make it, which would then take away the ability to do any kind of review Kahoot online. Although I can give you a review Kahoot online and not have me be part of it. I can make sure you have those available. And I can make a targeted review for you and put it up around 7:30 or so. Okay. So All right then, guys. We've done this for about an hour. This is awesome. Good practice, good review. Did you guys, for those of you who were participating and those of you taking notes, that was awesome too. And I'm going to put this up for first period people because tomorrow in second and fourth, I get an extra 40 minutes or so with you to try to do a little bit of this. And first period doesn't get that benefit. So I felt bad and wanted to do something special for them. So you guys helped with that. Thank you very much. And everybody out there in TV land, or YouTube TV land, I should say, have a great one and good luck on your midterms. See y'all later. You're very welcome. Thank you for staying. Sure.
So all the videos, like they generally